know now that government by organized money is just as dangerous as government by organized mobs. Never before in all our history have these forces been so united against one candidate as they stand today. They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
Welcome to this week's United Front Radio. Because of the economic depression, we have many people coming forward with reform ideas. But most of the proposed solutions in this pile have already failed historically. Some of these proposed reforms have failed many times and are now resurfacing as, quote, the new American paradigm for work, the shift change, or workplace democracy in the Mondragon factory model that is being sold as the next great American revolution by people like Garl Perovitz, Noam Chomsky, and Richard Wolff. This mess of already tried and already failed alternatives and their leaders are even mingling together, many of whom are being heavily funded by left or right-wing billionaire-created foundations, and on the way they're congratulating each other's dead ideas as the way forward. This is all a distraction from the main issue, that Wall Street has too much power. None of them are taking aim at Wall Street. From the political campaigns of Beppe Grillo in Italy to the after-parties platform in America, is this political failure by design or just ignorance? The purpose of United Front Radio is to present models that have historically worked and take action to implement them again today. To help us unravel this mess is somebody I know to be one of our audience's living heroes and the most accurate historian of our time, Dr. Webster Tarpley. Hello, Webster.
Yes, thank you. Well, I suppose we ought to jump right in then. In order to understand why these various brand X or indeed enemy-inspired organizing methods are inadequate, they're going to fail. They are not adequate to lead humanity out of the present total social, economic, political, military crisis. The question is, what are we measuring that against? In other words, what might work? What would be a viable method of organizing people? And for this, I'm afraid the technical term is the world political working class for itself. In other words, the idea that persons of goodwill, first of all, but people who are either involved with tangible physical production or who politically support tangible physical production, modernization, progress, industry, modern agriculture, people who are interested in the possibilities of science, people who support rising standards of living, full employment, and so forth, they ought to be formed into, or form themselves, if at all possible, into a kind of a political and educational entity, which would be the class for itself. And the for itself means self-consciousness. It means self-consciousness, and since it's a class, that gets you to class consciousness, that people have to be aware of their real position in society, their life chances, the groups that oppress them, the potentialities that are being denied by the various forms of bankrupt leadership. And this is the goal. You can think of it as a philosophical school with a worldwide mass base, or a worldwide revolutionary combat party. It has that aspect too. And of course, in the historical framework that we're in, it would have to be a mobilization of these people as mass forces, political mass forces, to fight bankers, finance oligarchs, and this very, very thin layer of bankers and oligarchs who are the beneficiaries of this system. If you really do a sociological analysis of globalization, and I'm afraid the sociologists have really let us down on this, right? They don't do their work. You'd probably find that the real beneficiaries of this system, they may be in the millions, but they're certainly not more than a couple of million who really benefit from this system. And then on the other side, you've got, 7 billion or some odd that are oppressed by this, right? Denied human potential, denied the possibility of a future, upward mobility, and so forth. Now, the thing I hope is obvious from this is that this is not local. This cannot be done at the level of a neighborhood or a city or a state or a factory or even a certain industry, even across a large country. When you're talking about this stuff, it is absolutely axiomatic. You've got to be talking about big countries, not even little countries, right? You could organize the class for itself in Luxembourg, and this would get you nowhere, or Belgium, Switzerland, whatever it is, right? These places simply, they cannot influence human development in that way. And if you're as some of these examples probably indicate, if you're anywhere in Europe, and this is part of my own background, anywhere in Europe, if you're not organizing European-wide, you're a loser. You're crazy. You're on a fool's errand. You look at the bankers, right? The fundamental form of bankers organization calls itself the Trilateral Commission. So that means North America, including Canada, Mexico, Japan, and other places in the Far East, and then all of Europe. So that's how they look at it, right? If that's the way they're organized, you've got to match that and indeed exceed it, right? By reaching places where they find it more difficult, right? The third world, developing countries. The basis of this is it has a history and it has an epistemological basis. It's based on class consciousness. When I say that, it doesn't mean this vulgar stuff about, the bosses are bad, although most of the time the bosses are bad, in our time anyway. The class consciousness is something that comes from Plato. You can see it in Plato's 7th book of the Politeia, right, of the Republic, where he tells you about the problems of oligarchy, the problems of tyranny, the problems of mob rule, because those are also present, right? How they often lead to tyranny. So Plato would be one important source, and then Machiavelli, and especially Machiavelli of the Discourses, where he writes about the few, right? And how the few always act to protect the few. And the problem of designing governments is to try to check this power of the few. So certainly we've come a long way, right? Since about 1310, we've had the evolution of the modern nation state, a very long period of gestation, but we have it, and it's already under heavy attack. The choice, of course, in that area is empire or nation state, and otherwise it's going to be chaos. And the democratic republic, right? The representative democracy, the U.S. Constitution, these are all big forward steps. But what we find is that it's going to take another agency. It's going to take something which is political and it's epistemological. In other words, it represents a point of view philosophically, but it also then wants to intervene in struggles, frankly, right? In the efforts of people to better their situation. So the general idea is a worldwide united front, right? We can't necessarily tell everybody, abolish the organizations you're in, forget your party, forget your union, forget your church, right? Whatever it is, or other organization. But if you're in favor of the massive increase of world economic production, especially in the form of infrastructure, if you're interested in science, you could imagine the worldwide class for itself would be a force that would contribute to planning and carrying out space exploration, to directing or influencing the course of biomedical research, right? Planning the various attacks on dreaded diseases. And then you have the other question, energy, right? High energy physics, right? Where there's something in this direction going on in that ITER program, right? The thermonuclear fusion power in the south of France.
People can look this up at iter.org.
You get the idea, right? These are the sorts of things that the worldwide class, political working class for itself would be interested in promoting. In other words, human progress, an agency that would be adequate for human progress. But that also then comes down to a minimum wage for fast food workers, or stopping foreclosures, or guaranteeing that people can get either a free education or a 0% student loan, and a series of things like this, because all of those are concrete mediations. The alternative is what? The alternative to class consciousness is false consciousness. Among the most pernicious kinds of false consciousness are localism, particularism, local chauvinism, and indeed the small nation chauvinism. Right? I don't want to beat up on Luxembourg and Belgium again, but if you were a complete, Luxembourg fanatic, right? Well, then you've sort of got the rest of the world against you. And in particular, questions that leftists used to be interested in, right? Alienation and fetishism. You look at the working class or working people as they are today empirically, right? What you find is that they're fragmented, they're manipulated, they're chock full of enemy ideology. They've been manipulated by psychological operations, right? PSYOPs, MK operations, mind control operations by intelligence agencies. And they're in just a confused, pragmatic, fragmented situation, which means they don't get the work done, right? They're impotent, right? They're an easy mark for the ruling class, especially around the question of money. Money is one of the main focuses of human alienation and fetishism. The idea being, you hear people say, well, our country doesn't have enough money to do that. Well, of course, any central banker knows you can print all the money you want. You can generate unlimited amounts of credit anytime you want if you're a central bank, at least within certain limits. What you're really saying, if you don't have the economic power to do it, you're really saying we don't have enough human labor of the right kind and the right number to do that. So what has happened is the productive power of mankind has been stripped away from the individual person or group, and it's been projected onto what? Gold, Bitcoin, or the dollar, the euro, whatever it is. And money, of course, it's a necessary mediation, and I'm not recommending an economy without money, but you have to remember what it is, right? Money is simply a political fiction. It's a way to distribute things, and it's a way to move productive resources. The other way to do it, of course, is a planned economy, right? You can have a state planning agency that does it, and you can even do it without money. But that has been tried, and that is not as effective as using money in a political way to get things done. But that's a kind of fetishism. So if people tell you, we don't have the money for that, well, what you're really talking about is labor power. So manpower or human labor, I guess, in a more modern way to put it. So now, if that's some idea of what you're trying to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
If that's understandable, what's wrong with the competing methods? And let me just say, as a preface to all this stuff, the idea of secessionism or breaking up the levels of national unity that have been attained so far, right? 19th century was a great time, right? The U.S. consolidated as a nation state, Canada, Italy, Germany, you go around the world, right? Switzerland, all kinds of places emerged as nation states. The idea that you would break those up is an extremely reactionary and dangerous idea. And indeed, this is the main policy of the CIA, MI6, the other intelligence agencies, right? Because on the road to constituting the political working class for itself, who do you find opposing you? You find the bankers, of course, but you find their political operatives out in the open, right? Democratic and Republican political leaders, but you've also got these agencies that operate in a covert way. So we have the Scottish referendum, right? This is a very good example. What you have to understand is the smaller the unit, the more reactionary the unit is likely to be. And this is what these local control guys don't understand. What is being proposed in the Scottish referendum is not the independence of Scotland by any stretch of the imagination. What is being proposed is a form of local control. You can compare it to, let's just leave the comparisons aside because they might lead us away. But with the Scottish referendum, what you're going to get is a Bantustan. You may remember in the last decades of South Africa, right? The white minority government, in order to maintain itself, organized these self-governing enclaves or entities where black populations